All right, look, today's deck profile is not the best deck in the world. This is not the top tier competitive deck, so if you're here to get the best list to crush your local planetary qualifiers, I don't know if you should go with this one. But this is a super fun deck. It's another deck running Palpatine's Return, and I just have a blast playing this deck. I wanted to share it with you all. It is a great time, even if you're not going to win every single game. Let's just take a look at the profile. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and today we are back with another Star Wars Unlimited deck profile. This deck is very, very fun, but like I said in the intro, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're here for the most competitive deck, this isn't quite the right place. If you're here to have an absolute blast with a, maybe not underrated, maybe correctly rated, but still pretty fun leader, then maybe you're in the right place. There has been one good Aphra deck that we've seen, a little blue Aphra action that did some placement at a bigger event, but that doesn't run Palpatine's Return, and this one runs Palpatine's Return, and as you guys know, I love Palpatine's Return, so let's take a look at our Green Aphra deck profile, trying to get something out of Aphra's little kit here, and you know what, honestly, this does work better than you might expect. Is this basically a bad Boba Fett deck? Yeah, I mean, look, a green-yellow Boba is going to do a lot of what this does a lot better in the metagame, but yeah, ton of fun. So without taking too much more time, let's jump right into it. So Dr. Aphra is our leader for this deck. Dr. Aphra is a really weird leader. On her front side, she kind of does a little around nothing, slightly more than nothing, I guess. When the regroup phase starts, you're going to mill the top card of your deck, discard the top card of your deck, and that largely does just two different things in this deck, and one of them sometimes matters, the other sometimes matters. When Dr. Aphra flips, which is a turn 5 flip, which is kind of nice, she becomes a 2/5 and has, we'll talk about the when deployed in a minute, but she's going to get +3/+0 if you have 5 different costs in your discard pile or more. So Dr. Aphra's leader side is just kind of setting up to get her unit side to be powerful, and when it's set up, flipping into a 5/5 is actually pretty sweet. We'll talk a little bit about some interactions that are kind of cool with that, but this is a leader that you aren't just going to be aggressively flipping out on turn 4 as much as possible. Instead, we're going to use this flip to get this on deploy, this when deployed ability, because this is actually the really strong part of her kit. You're going to choose 3 cards from your discard pile with different names when she's deployed, and then return one of them at random to your hand. So there are some really nice things you can do with this, especially if you hold on to this flip for a little bit later. You can do things like return Overwhelming Barrage to your hand, return Palpatine's Return to your hand, so you're going to kind of have a leg up on this attrition war when you get to the late game. You can also return things like Sentinels or ambush units or powerful, just small powerful events like McClunky to your hand. All that stuff tends to be actually pretty good, pretty impactful. And it does mean that when Dr. Aphra flips, she's just going to like +1 a card in your hand, but that is hopefully going to be a pretty impactful card for the situation. And what we're trying to do in this deck is just leverage that advantage. So we're trying to kind of hold down the fort, control the board, and then eventually win out by just using the advantage that we gain from Dr. Aphra, her ability to return things like Overwhelming Barrage to your hand, and eventually just take control of the game and then win out from there. So to do that, of course, we're playing green. Green is so good at this, and it gives access to Palpatine's Return, and Energy Conversion Lab is just absolutely, frankly, busted card that allows us to get some clutch attacks in early on. Star Wars Unlimited is a game that turns on a dime. You can't let your opponent build too much momentum up, so we're going to use Conversion Lab and our units to just try and hold their board down as we build up to our late game. So to that end, let's jump right into our units and talk about how each one is kind of impacting that plan and allowing us to control the game. Starting with Greedo, probably the best 1-drop in the game, right? I think this is the best 1-drop in the game. Greedo is insane, actually. He's a 1-drop 3/1 with 1 defeated. You get to mill the top card of your deck, and then if it's a non-unit card, deal 2 damage or something. Cool thing about this deck is that when you hit a unit card with Greedo, there's a reasonable shot at something like Vader or Maul, and Greedo can actually self-mill you a little bit more to get Dr. Aphra to set those up. And I think I totally skipped that, but the cool thing about Dr. Aphra's mill is also very rarely, because it's not very likely, Dr. Aphra will mill you into Vader or Maul to set up the Palpatine Return for that turn 5, put out a Vader, put out a Maul, have a good time. Greedo is another thing that also sets that up. So he's a must play in here already. I wanted to play him just because he's good, but getting that extra mill is just a little extra synergy for Aphra to be able to set this stuff up. By the way, I think Aphra will get a lot better when we can get more access to things like self-mill or ways to interact with the cards in the discard. I think that's the big issue right now, but yeah, we'll use what we got right now. Next, we have Bazine Natal. Bazine Natal is, I've really fallen in love with this card. She is really, really strong at a lot of stages of the game, honestly. One of the best turn ones you can do against control. You go up against like Palpatine or any other kind of ramping control deck, or even Boba Fett decks. Turn one Bazine hitting their Super Laser Technician or Resupply can totally throw them off their game. And then late in the game, Bazine Natal can snipe out the powerful units that when you get to that, again, that attrition war where you're each trying to play big battle cruiser units down. Bazine Natal can turn that in your favor a little bit, which is really nice too. Otherwise, she also has Smuggle. This deck is notoriously missing 4-drops. There just aren't a lot of good ones in yellow or green, honestly. They're just not the best 4-drops in the world if you're not playing mono element. So yeah, I mean, Bazine having a Smuggle for 4 is actually kind of cool. Sometimes you'll just resource her and go, yeah, you know, turn 3, I'll just play Bazine instead to get that extra kind of +1 card value when you get her in play and get that effect going. So it's, yeah, it's nice. Even though they're getting a random card back almost all the time with Bazine, she is going to hit a card that was more valuable than the card they drew back because you get to select it. So she is very, very strong. We have Boba Fett Disintegrator in here. Now, I mean, people... Listen, I'm sorry, these are expensive decks. I like to play the good cards. If you don't have Boba Fett, that's totally cool. You can throw in stuff like Toro Calican and then throw in the like Forlom Zuckuss package to give you some more Bounty Hunters trigger off them. Toro Calican is a lot of the time exactly as good as Boba Fett because they're just going to kill the Boba Fett very quickly. However, with Energy Conversion Lab, that's where Boba Fett does get that big advantage. You can let your opponent attack, then Boba Fett in with ECL to deal his on-attack damage, kill the unit that attacked you without taking anything back, and kind of help Boba Fett give your opponent give you a 2-for-1 basically on your opponent. So Boba Fett is in this deck definitely less replaceable than in some other non-green versions of this kind of list, but if you need to, go ahead, put in Toro Calican instead, throw some other bounty hunters in there. Totally a route you can take with this too. We have Phase 3 Dark Trooper. Wow, what a monster. What a monster of a Sentinel. Always good. Great, again, great to ECL in. When he attacks a smaller unit with ECL, then he's going to get his trigger, get an experience counter, then become a 4/4 Sentinel, and sometimes that can kind of give you a bit of leverage on taking out your opponent's stronger units. But yeah, he's awesome. We do have a mix here, by the way, of Underworld and non-Underworld units. We have enough Underworld units to make McClunky work and make Darth Maul a little more consistent on being a house, but we're not too worried about playing only Underworld units. You usually have one when you need one. So we're okay putting some Imperials like Dark Trooper in here, which is great because those cards are insane. We don't want to not run them. Bosca's in here as well. Bosca, some people like him, some people not so much. I do like him enough to put a couple in. Again, if you do have to go a budget route and play that Toro Calican, then you might want to up Bossk to 3 just to make sure you kind of get those Toro triggers to get some value. But Bossk is like Boba Fett. The only reason he's not great is because people will try and kill him all the time, because if he sits out and play, you get too much value out of him. But he's a 4/5 with that ambush to take something out. And then when you play an event, which you have a bunch of good events to play, and he's going to get some extra value as well. Obviously, doing things like an Overwhelming Barrage on Bossk, getting that extra 2 damage and then getting 6 more damage across the board. That's just like, that sweeps so much off of the board and is not something your opponent can let exist. So they'll kill him pretty quick, but that ambush helps him make sure he at least takes something down first. We have 2 copies of Rook in here too, because again, we're running ECL, we're running Timely Intervention, so we're running Rook. Rook will help shore up late game matches. Rook is such a house against decks like Palpatine too, that just have to go through extra steps to try and get rid of him, or get damage on him so that they can take him. And if they don't get rid of him, then he takes care of all the reinforcement walkers and stuff that you're going to run into. So yeah, Rook's obviously great. Anytime we run any ambush capable cards like Timely Intervention, we're going to want to run Rook in here. We have 1 Pirate Battle Tank. This is a little cheeky card. I kind of like this. It's been kind of fun to have as a 6 cost. It is something you can Palpatine's Return. if you really need to just like whip out a Sentinel and Aphra can throw it in there for you. It's not good enough to run more than one, but it's a good resource because you can smuggle it late game. It's a fine card to hold just to get a Sentinel in to hold the fort down, and it's a fine card to mill with Aphra, so it works out as kind of a nice little one-of, but it's just a 4/6 Sentinel. That's all it's there for. It is an Underworld too, for what it's worth, and that actually is kind of cute with McClunky sometimes too. You can let it take some damage, then McClunky it back into hand. Not bad. All right, we're running 3 copies of Vader and 3 copies of Maul here. And I'm going to say with this list, the Vader's almost non-negotiable here because we're running Maul also, but we really want to have these units to get the maximum value, potential value out of Palpatine's return in this list. So this might not be a list to run if you don't have any Vaders, where I think you can easily replace the Boba Fett's. The Vaders you're going to want. Now, the good news is that our reprint of Set 1 is coming very soon. So if you're catching this after or close to the release of like Twilight of the Republic, and that Set 1 reprint is on the way really soon, then maybe Vaders are going to get a little bit easier to get a hold of and make this more playable. Also, Twilight of the Republic maybe is just going to add a bunch of new Force units and villainy that we can start to bring back to Palpatine's return. So maybe this is just, this doesn't matter anymore. Maybe there's a ton of really good Force units to put in now instead of Vader or in addition to Vader. For now, 3 Vader, 3 Maul. Why? They're insane. Vader is going to kill something and put something on board. He's going to put Boba Fett's on board, or he's going to give you a space unit to use. You're going to put a Dark Trooper into play. He's going to put out Bazine Natal and then screw with their hand as well. All of these are really, really great. Maul is going to kill stuff, and that Underworld damage-taking thing is very active in this deck. One of the best ways to get rid of that Bazine Natal that's just been sitting around for a couple turns that your opponent doesn't care about anymore, or Cartel Spacer or something, or a Boba Fett that's already taken a bunch of damage and gotten value. Keeping your Maul in play as a 7/6 is so valuable, so it's really, really nice to have that ability to toss that damage onto an Underworld unit instead. And yeah, he's going to close games with that extra overwhelm damage, and yeah, Maul's just so good. He's so sweet too. I do wish, like the Kylo deck, we could have things like Palpatine in here, but it's just too costly. It's not going to work out with the aspect penalty. But again, I'm looking forward to Twilight of the Republic and seeing what other Force units we can slap in here to make this return work a little more often. Until then, though, we have these reinforcement walkers in here. 2 of these guys. In any deck that's trying to go late, if you can fit the Reinforcement Walker in, it's a good thing because it will give you that extra healing. It'll give you that card advantage. It'll kind of win out against other mid-range / control style decks. We just run 2 of it because it isn't a Force unit. It is a little more awkward to try and Palpatine's return. But if I could have like a Force unit version of Reinforcement Walker, easy 3 of. I would slap it in here right away. Onto our space units, we have Cartel Spacer, 3 of. I like this guy quite a bit. When played, it's another kind of cool one off of Vader. Sometimes Vader can hit Cartel Spacer, and if you have one other yellow thing in play, then you're going to get to exhaust something, and you can kind of slow down an opponent's big turn that way. But just in the early game, it's just a 2/3 in space that you can McClunky back to hand to deal with something if they go to ground. It's a nice little flexibility that you have with that card, or it can help just kind of attack some things in space and do a little bit of damage if you need it to as well. It is certainly a replaceable unit if there's something you like a little more, but you don't want to go down too much on space, and it's one of the better space units we have, honestly. The exhaust is also a nice combo with Boba Fett in the early mid game. If you get that Fett down, McClunky your Cartel Spacer back into hand, then play the Cartel Spacer again, and then exhaust their unit, attack to murder it with Boba Fett. It works pretty well. It's got a lot of nice interactions. We have 3 7th Fleet Defender in here. I do wish this was Underworld, but it's too good to not play as a 3/2 shielded. It is just going to do a lot of work. It's going to take care of a lot of early space aggression, trade into a lot of random space units, or double attack into a bigger space unit, a thing like Home 1, to be able to take it out and trade up a little bit that way. So 7th Fleet Defender is always super good. And we're running a couple copies of Xanadu Blood in here. Okay, I'm going to be honest, I think this guy is a little bit underrated. It's performed pretty well so far when it's come up. It does attack as a 6/6 for 6, which is pretty reasonable in here. Obviously, if you're running like a Boba Fett deck, you'd run Slave 1 because of, you'd run Fire Spray because of how capable that card is at dealing with things in space. But since Boba Fett is so much less reliable in this deck, just as the unit version, I kind of like the Xanadu Blood in here instead. Since we're not going to get that immediate ready, instead we have this ability to ECL in the Xanadu Blood, bounce back something like a Bazine Natal to mess with their hand a little bit more, and then exhaust either a unit or a resource to mess with their turn. And we can do that every time this thing attacks. So it has this ability to really kind of screw with the game. And of course, when we're running things like Maul, being able to Xanadu Blood the Maul turn after turn to get that ambush going if you need to or something is like actually pretty cool too. When you have the 2 out, you can attack with Maul, they play a unit, then you Xanadu Blood, bounce Maul to hand, then replay the Maul and ambush the unit they played. So Maul got to attack twice in that turn, and if they're just trying to stick something to ground, you basically can lock them out of the game that way. So Xanadu Blood definitely has been a pretty cool card. I've been enjoying it. I still think it's fine as a 2-up because you really don't want to go too crazy on space in here. It's not as good as Fire Spray is in Boba Fett, but it's been solid. Now on to our events. 3 McClunky. McClunky is the card you want to see every opening hand against aggro decks. You basically need to start like Greedo McClunky, Bazine McClunky, Cartel McClunky or something to slow them down enough. But against non-aggro decks, it still is really good. We've gone through a bunch of cute interactions where like it also can return Maul to hand, it can return Cartel Spacer to hand, Bazine Natal to hand. Fett to hand, if you ECL Fett early on to get rid of something, and then you Fett another thing, and then it's got some damage on him. Now you McClunky the Fett, you do 3 more damage to something else, and then you've got enough resources at this point to Timely Intervention the Fett and kill something else. So you can get like a lot of value out of combining these cards, which makes McClunky really awesome. McClunky also bouncing Bosk, super, super strong, because that's going to deal 5 damage to something, and then you're going to get to ambush with Bosk again later. So yeah, works really great. Big fan of that. Timely Intervention, we've gone through all the units already. You understand why you want to ambush with units, right? Great to have these easy resource cards, especially in the early game, and then in the late game, the Timely allows you to do things like attack with Reinforcement Walker right away when the game goes really late, or all the other things you want to Timely in, so super cool. We have No Good to Be Dead in here. No Good to Be Dead 2 of as a way to hold down particular units, hold down the fort again. We're just trying to get to that late game, so using No Good to Be Dead on their leaders, sometimes absolutely insane, super, super clutch, or just any other unit that is just doing too much work right now and we need to buy a little more time. It works great for that. Waylay, another card that mostly just buys time, but that's all we really needed to do. Super good against Palpatine, of course, for bouncing back to hand the thing that they steal eventually. But a lot of the time you're playing this kind of turn 3, turn 4. If you can keep them down to just having 1 unit on board, waylay it just to sort of wait another turn, get to that point where you can start to potentially Palpatine's return something. Yeah, works really good. Good card. Waylay's a good card. Who knew? We have a copy of Cunning here as well. Now, this is my cute off-aspect Cunning. It is also the lone 4 cost card in the deck, which means that for Dr. Aphra, it's going to help turn on her ability if you randomly manage to mill it sometimes. But it's just in here as it's often a card you'll resource early on, but if you draw it late, it can kind of Swiss Army knife do whatever you need it to do. That's all it's there for, just as a Swiss Army knife answer to a lot of kind of problematic board states in the mid to late game. Overwhelming Barrage, of course, is probably the strongest green card, maybe the strongest green card. And in here, it is a card that we are going to want to use to manage the board and then hopefully get back with Dr. Aphra. Now, there is a really cheeky thing you can do. If you play the Dr. Aphra before the Overwhelming Barrage, sometimes, and I want people to be aware of this because this interaction has come up, you're going to be down, you're going to have 4 different costs in your discard pile for Dr. Aphra, meaning that she doesn't currently have her bonus, but you have no 5 cost among those. You maybe have a 1, 2, 3, and a 6 or something. Then you go and play your Overwhelming Barrage on your Dr. Aphra, giving her +2/+2. The Overwhelming Barrage goes to the discard pile before its effect resolves. So it's gonna go there and then turn on her +3/+0, then apply the +2/+2. So through that you're able to kind of surprise your opponent, going from 2/5 to dealing 7 damage with Overwhelming Barrage, and then having a 7/7 in play as well to clean anything else up with. Can be that can be a real thing that happens, and this play can actually come up as early as turn 4, believe it or not. But everything, the stars all have to align to make that work. In order to do that, you need to do something like lose 2 cards, a 1 and a 2 drop maybe in the early turns, as well as milling perfectly into a like 2, 3, 6 drop, something like that. And then you have to, when you flip Aphra, return the card, the cost that you have a duplicate of already in there, to make sure you still have 4 different costs remaining when you flip her, and then you can play that Overwhelming Barrage and kind of set everything up perfectly. I don't recommend that line, but if it happens to line up, then that's great. But really, I still think you should save that Dr. Aphra deploy to be able to get back the Overwhelming Barrage. But in Star Wars, we don't always have the perfect line set up for us. We have to kind of play to whatever's going on in the context of the game. So just keep it in mind. It is something that can happen. And then finally, 3 copies of Palpatine's Return, because we want to roll the dice and see if we can manage to turn 5 play Vader or Maul in this deck. But if we don't, it is still an insane card to have in green late game decks, because it just brings back your Vaders and Mauls and your reinforcement walkers, and sometimes things like Rook or Pirate Battle Tank or something like that when they are relevant. But yeah, we really play it in there just for the die roll, but it's still a good card in any case, a solid card to have access to. And if opponents are playing things like Bazine Natals, it can absolutely wreck them after they try and discard your Vader, your Maul, and then you draw the Palpatine's Return and get it right back. Now, of course, before we close things out, we have to go over some sideboard options for our Aphra deck. If you're really trying to get sweaty and want to sideboard your deck and your locals to make sure you can win. I mean, I recommend sideboarding always anyway, but we do have some pretty simple stuff here today. Shoot First is a card that is great against other aggro decks, especially making your Greedo win those fights. Greedo shooting first is always kind of funny, but it does help a lot in kind of accruing that advantage that you need in order to win the game. So big fan of Shoot First. Black Sun Starfighter is especially cool in here because it is an underworld unit as well, but it's just going to help stave off those A-Wings, stave off those red 3s. We'll just trade with them. Actually, it doesn't really stave them off. It's just going to kill them, but you know, sometimes that's what we need. We're pretty low on space here, so just being able to shore that up a little bit is always nice. I do recommend the extra copy of both Waylay and Reinforcement Walker in your sideboard, no matter what else you choose to put in. I recommend putting a 3rd copy of Waylay and Walker in just to be able to shore up those aggro mid-range or mid-range control matchups. Sometimes you just need to buy time, so more Waylay is good. Sometimes you just need to win the war in the late game. More Reinforcement Walker is good for that. And if your opponent's late game war is going into space again, I like this Architens. I think this should be played a little more. If more hero control decks start to get played, which I suspect they will in set 3, then I think this card's going to gain some stocks. I know it's just depending on if anyone in your locals is playing things like Home 1, which a lot of people, if they're playing like a more meta-focused local, they're not going to see a lot of that. But if they are, that's where Architens is super good. If they're not, don't worry about it. You don't need to play it. Those are just some options. You can also shore up any of the other 2-drops in the deck. Things like No Good to Be Dead, totally fine to shore up. And just like we had in the Kylo deck, things like Cobb Vanth are maybe reasonable too to put in against aggro. Just depends on what you need. So there are some options for you. Hope you guys find something useful in there, or let me know what works for you in the comments down below. Yeah, so that's the list. Again, you're just going to control the board. You're going to hold down the fort, try and kill as many things as possible. Don't take unnecessary attacks. Take initiative when it's important to you. That's much more important than dealing damage to their base. And then eventually you'll start to play things that will deal damage to their base and take them down. And that's the general way to play this deck against aggro and mid-range. And then against more control decks, you want to try to be a little more aggressive. Put Greedos down, put attack with Boba Fett's. Continue to keep their board clear. Don't let them get advantage. And if you're playing against Palpatine, if anything gets damaged, try to trade it into anything as soon as possible to leave him with poor options for stealing your stuff, or hold on to that Waylay to take it right back. That is the best way to play the deck. You will not win every game with this deck. I'm just telling you right now, but you will sometimes make opponents feel bad because you're going to beat them with Dr. Aphra, who is not as bad as people say she is, but also not as good as you would want her to be. Now I'm hoping with future sets, set 3 especially, I'm hoping to see some more Force units to make Palpatine's Return good, and I'm hoping to see more cool graveyard interactions as we go on to make Aphra a better deck. So check back in the future. This is a leader I've had my eye on that I'm really happy with. I think I'm going to pick up a showcase actually, because I do think she's really cool, and the showcase is not very expensive right now, and I think that at some point she might become kind of a pretty sweet deck. So we'll certainly cover her again in the future if we find a deck that works a little better. But for now, I wanted to share what I've been playing with because I love Return, I love Aphra, and it's a and it is a fun deck to play. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have you had any success with Dr. Aphra? Or if you try this list, how does it go for you? I would love to hear from you guys. It is a fun deck to play, and this was a fun video to make. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and we will see you all in the next one.